I'm 32 years old, and I was married to my ex-wife, Emily, who's 30, for about 2 years. We were madly in love, or at least, I thought we were. Even now, it still stings to talk about how she cheated on me, especially after everything we'd been through together. Our story goes way back. Emily and I weren't just some random couple who met as adults. We actually grew up in the same neighborhood. As kids, we knew each other pretty well. But when I was around 15, her family moved to another part of town, and we lost touch. Years later, purely by chance, we ran into each other again. And even back when I was just a kid who barely knew what love was, I had the biggest crush on Emily. So, when we reconnected as adults, that old feeling came rushing back. We caught up, exchanged numbers, and started talking regularly. Luckily for me, Emily was single at the time. After a few weeks of hanging out, I finally worked up the nerve to ask her out, and she said yes. We dated for a year before deciding to tie the knot. It might sound simple, but my love for Emily ran deep. Marrying her felt like everything in my life had finally fallen into place. A lot had changed over the years, but deep down, she was still the same bright, witty, and lively girl I remembered from our childhood. By then, Emily had become a junior high school teacher, and I was working as a mechanic at an auto shop. Between the two of us, she was definitely the brainy one. She always had a thing for smart people. Me, I never really cared about that kind of thing. I just liked people for who they were. That was one of the big differences between us. At first, when we started hanging out again, I sometimes felt like I wasn't on her level. But the more we spent time together, the deeper we fell for each other. As I got more comfortable in our relationship, my confidence grew. But even then, I always put in extra effort to make sure Emily was happy. Our marriage was a blast, full of fun, laughter, and sweet moments. Emily had this amazing way of making life as a married couple feel easy and peaceful. We hardly ever argued. When we were dating, she told me how much she hated being yelled at. She made me promise that, no matter how upset I got, I'd never raise my voice at her. In return, she promised the same. So, whenever we had disagreements, they could get intense, but we never yelled. When it came to having kids, we were completely on the same page. Neither of us saw the point in waiting for years before starting a family. To me, it just didn't make sense. I liked the idea of having a child within the first year or two of marriage so that we could grow up alongside them, rather than waiting until we were older to start. So, as soon as we got married, we were excited to start trying for a baby. There were times Emily thought she might be pregnant. She'd miss a period, only for it to show up the next day. But in our first year of marriage, she actually did get pregnant. Unfortunately, after just a month, she had a miscarriage. Losing the baby hit us hard. We had been trying for months, and when it finally happened, it was taken away just as quickly. After that, we decided to take a break before trying again. But when we did, the same thing happened. The second time, she was about 5 weeks along. One morning, she woke up and noticed she was bleeding heavily. We rushed to the hospital, hoping for the best, but the doctors confirmed our worst fear: she had lost the baby again. Losing another baby was devastating. The whole experience drained us emotionally, and for months, even thinking about trying again was too painful to talk about. I did everything I could to support Emily during that time, trying to stay strong for both of us. As time went on, we slowly started to heal. The pain of those 2 losses never really disappeared, but we did our best to move forward. I knew Emily needed time to process everything, so I made a point not to bring up having kids until she was truly ready. Eventually, our marriage found its way back to normal, and life started to feel steady again. Even when things seemed okay on the surface, I never stopped treating Emily like she was the most important person in my world. I took care of everything at home so she wouldn't have to stress about anything besides her job as a teacher. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, yard work, grocery runs, I handled it all. And every now and then, I'd surprise her with a special meal just to brighten her day. I paid close attention to her feelings because I knew deep down she was struggling. She had started believing something was wrong with her, like she was cursed or bringing bad luck. My biggest goal during that time was to make sure she knew none of this was her fault and that I loved her more than ever. About 6 months after we lost our second pregnancy, something unexpected happened. One weekend, while I was in the middle of my usual house cleaning routine, Emily walked up to me with tears in her eyes. Later that night, as she was sleeping, I noticed her phone buzzing non-stop with notifications. At first, I ignored it, not wanting to disturb her. But when I came back from the kitchen and saw the messages still flooding in, I decided to silence her notifications. That's when I realized they weren't stopping. Messages were pouring in from both WhatsApp and Instagram, one after another. My curiosity got the best of me. Emily had a fingerprint lock on her phone, so I gently used her finger to unlock it. I just had to see who was blowing up her phone like this. Once I unlocked her phone, the first thing I noticed was that all these messages were coming from a contact saved with nothing but a single heart emoji. My stomach dropped. Who the hell was this? I started reading their conversation, and the more I scrolled, the worse it got. It was clear she was talking to some guy who kept asking about her pregnancy and how their baby was doing. At first, I went through the messages over and over, trying to make sense of it. Was he a doctor or something? But after digging a little deeper, it became obvious. He definitely wasn't. At the same time, I checked her Instagram. And that's when I got hit with another shock. The same guy had been messaging her there too. But what really made me sick? He had even sent her a picture of his junk. Honestly, if it hadn't been for that disgusting message, I might not have even realized they were talking on Instagram too. But that chat thread confirmed everything. Emily had been cheating on me. At that point, I had to know who this guy was and how long this had been going on. So, I pulled up his Instagram profile and started digging. And guess what? He was a freaking scientist. I just sat there, staring at my screen, trying to process everything. It took me the entire night to accept that this nightmare was actually real. But the part that hurt the most? Realizing I had been bending over backward, working my ass off to create a happy home, for a baby that wasn't even mine. That night, I couldn't stay in that house a second longer. I grabbed a few clothes, threw them in a bag, and drove straight to my friend's place. I needed to get away from Emily after what I'd just found out. But the final gut punch? The guy knew she was married. He even asked her from time to time how I was treating her and the baby. And her response? Yeah, he's trying. Trying. Reading that made my blood boil. After everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed, she had the nerve to act like I was just some guy making an effort. 4 years, I had carried all the weight in our marriage, handling everything at home, making sure Emily was comfortable, cooking her favorite meals late at night, giving her massages when she was exhausted, and dealing with her unpredictable mood swings. Finding out she had been cheating on me and lying about the baby's father? That cut deeper than anything I had ever felt before. That morning, right around sunrise, Emily woke up and noticed I wasn't home. She called me, sounding confused, asking where I was. Keeping my tone distant, I told her I had some unfinished work at the auto shop. I reassured her I'd be back later that morning. But the truth was, I had no intention of going back anytime soon. Days passed, and I still hadn't returned. Emily called me over and over, but I ignored every single one. Desperate, she even showed up at the shop, only to be told I had taken a week off due to family matters. Meanwhile, I was busy uncovering the full truth. Using a fake Instagram account, I dug deeper into this guy she had been seeing. Turns out, he had been a scientist for years and had even won some big award. But the real kicker? He was married. His wife was a psychologist, and they had 2 kids together. I didn't hesitate. I reached out to his wife on Instagram, laid everything out plainly, and sent her proof, screenshots of their conversation straight from Emily's phone. She messaged me back the next day, asking to meet in person. On the 4th day, the same day I finally went back home to face Emily, I met up with this guy's wife. Even with all the evidence in front of her, she was in complete shock. She kept shaking her head like she just couldn't process it. And when I told her that Emily was pregnant with her husband's child, that nearly broke her. We both agreed we had to confront them. By the time I walked into our home that evening, all the anger and pain I had been holding in for 4 days was boiling over. Emily rushed toward me, relieved to see me again. But before she could say a word, I looked her straight in the eye and said, "I want a paternity test." Her face went pale. She was completely caught off guard. "What? Why would you say that?" she asked, forcing a nervous laugh. I kept my tone firm. "Because I need to know that this baby is mine." She laughed again, but this time it felt forced. "Are you serious? That's ridiculous. Of course the baby is yours." I watched as she tried to play it off, acting like my request was insane. If I hadn't already known the truth, I might have believed her performance. But I did know. And her fake confidence only made me angrier. For the first time in years, I raised my voice at her. And she froze, completely stunned by my reaction. What happened next changed everything. Emily broke down in tears, accusing me of falsely blaming her for cheating. She kept saying she couldn't believe I would ever think that about her after everything we had been through. I stood there, watching as she sobbed, trying to manipulate me with her emotions. But I wasn't budging. I told her, straight up, that I was going to get a paternity test, no matter how much she tried to guilt-trip me. Then, I pulled out the printed screenshots of her conversations with him and tossed them onto the table. Her face went pale. For a moment, she just stood there in stunned silence. Then, scrambling for an excuse, she insisted it was all just harmless flirting, that nothing physical had ever happened. Her explanation was so weak, I didn't even waste my breath arguing. Instead, I cut straight to the point. "Any man out there calling this baby his is a big deal, Emily. That's why I need the test. No more talking around it." We went back and forth for hours, but eventually, she caved. She agreed to the paternity test. And when the results came in, they confirmed exactly what I already knew. The baby wasn't mine. At that point, Emily realized there was no point in pretending anymore. So, she switched tactics, begging for forgiveness. She even tried to spin some ridiculous lie about getting pregnant through a donor and not knowing who the real father was. I saw right through it. But I was too drained, too angry, too done to even argue anymore. I left her at the hospital, drove home, and started packing my things. I was halfway through when she walked in. She tried to stop me, pleading, crying, grabbing at my arm. My anger hit a boiling point. I was this close to doing something I'd regret. So, instead of saying another word, I walked out. There were no words that could fully express the level of disappointment, hurt, and betrayal I felt. As I reached the door, Emily's whole demeanor shifted. She went from crying to full-on screaming, throwing insults at me, trying anything to make me stay. But I didn't stop. I walked out and didn't look back. For a week, I ignored her completely. That didn't stop her from calling, though. Every single day, she left voicemail after voicemail, crying, screaming, begging. It was like she had split into different people, one moment sobbing, the next raging. Then, 2 days ago, her parents called. And instead of asking for my side of the story, they tore into me. They called me a deadbeat, said I was the worst father a child could ever have. The irony? The baby wasn't even mine. Honestly, I didn't have the energy for drama. My plan was simple. Get a quiet divorce, move on, and leave her mess behind. I had no intention of dragging her name through the mud. But Emily, she had no problem lying about me to her parents, her friends, anyone who would listen, painting herself as the victim, twisting the story so I was the villain. And now, her parents were even threatening me, saying there would be serious consequences if anything happened to her or the baby. Even though that child isn't mine, I don't want an innocent baby to suffer because of all this. So, for now, I'm staying quiet. At least until she gives birth. Just a quick update. Someone here mentioned my plan to divorce Emily quietly, without stirring up drama. Let me make one thing clear. I meant that. I'm completely serious about ending this marriage. Looking back, I've already put up with more than enough in this relationship. But the more I think about it, the more I wonder, was she cheating on me from the very first year of our marriage? The possibility makes my head spin. Some of you pointed out that marrying her after only a year of dating seemed too fast. But at the time, it didn't feel that way. I had known Emily since childhood, so a year of dating felt like more than enough. But none of that matters now. Last week, I made a post on Facebook, just a vague one, hinting at the heartbreak she had caused and how our plans had completely fallen apart. I wasn't expecting anything to come from it, but then, someone reached out. Turns out, a guy who saw my post was a fellow teacher at Emily's school. He was also a mutual friend of ours on Facebook. He messaged me saying he had something important to tell me about her. So, we set up a time to meet. And that's when he dropped a bomb on me. According to him, Emily had been sleeping with some of the fathers of her students. At first, I didn't believe a word of it. It sounded too insane to be real. But then, he showed me a video. A video he had secretly recorded a while back. Apparently, Emily had a thing for chasing after the dads of the brightest kids in her class. And she wasn't just casually involved, she was actively pursuing them. He told me he was coming forward now because he didn't want me to get blindsided any further. And if that wasn't enough, he also let me in on another little secret. Emily hadn't quit her job. The school knew what she was doing, and that's why she was let go. Hearing that, it made everything click. All those months when I was bending over backward to take care of her, wearing myself out trying to be the best husband I could be, she was cheating on me the whole time. It had to be the only explanation. Her paychecks never changed. She still left the house at the same time every morning, came home in the afternoon like clockwork, and even told me stories about her students. Stories I now know were complete lies. Saying I felt used doesn't even come close. I've never been used, deceived, or manipulated like this before in my life. The level of anger I felt after hearing all of this? I didn't even know I was capable of being that angry. Right now, I've already contacted a lawyer, and the divorce process is officially in motion. Once everything is finalized, I don't know what my next move will be. But I'll keep you all updated on how things play out with Emily and her never-ending chaos. And for those wondering, taking her back? That would be like shooting myself in the foot. There's no love left. Not even an ounce of pity. Because after what she's done, she doesn't deserve it. While I was doing everything in my power to be a good husband, supporting Emily, taking care of what I thought was our child, who knows what else she was up to behind my back. Honestly, a person like her is capable of anything. At that point, I had enough. Her parents had been blowing up my phone, calling me non-stop, so I finally decided to confront them. I went straight to their family WhatsApp group and dropped the bomb, screenshots of her messages with her affair partner, clear as day. Just to make sure they fully understood, I sent a long voice note explaining everything. This all happened before my final showdown with Emily. When I finally sat her down, I didn't hold back. I told her straight up, I knew about everything. About all the men. And about the fact that the real father of her child was a scientist. She never saw that coming. The look on her face said it all. She had already lost weight from all the crying, the stress, the endless begging for me to talk to her over the past few days. I half expected her to start pleading again. But she didn't. Instead, she got defensive. And then she admitted to cheating with the scientist. But here's the part that truly blew my mind. She actually had the audacity to tell me she did it because she wanted better genes for her baby. Apparently, she thought mine were too weak and stupid. I couldn't believe she said that to my face. But she did. What she didn't know was that I had already reached out to her affair partner, through his wife. I made sure he knew exactly who Emily was, a serial cheater who had been playing all of us. And here's where karma really kicked in. Emily assumed she had this scientist guy locked down, probably expecting hefty child support payments from him. But he had other plans. He wanted to fix things with his wife. So, before agreeing to anything, he demanded a paternity test too. And guess what? He wasn't the father either. Turns out, during that same time period, Emily had been sleeping with multiple men. Me, the scientist, and at least 2 other guys. One of them was even a father of one of her students. She had no idea who the real father was. A few weeks later, after her affair partner found out the baby wasn't his, my lawyer sent Emily the divorce papers. At first, she refused to sign. She claimed I had ruined her life and that I had no choice but to stay with her. I honestly couldn't help but laugh. But here's the kicker. When her parents found out that she didn't even know who the father was, they disowned her out of sheer embarrassment. With nowhere left to turn, she finally gave in and signed the papers. And just like that, it was over. We're officially done. She thought she could outsmart me. But in the end, she lost everything. Her marriage, her family, any chance of financial support. Now, she's on her own, raising that baby without a clue who the real father is. And honestly, I hope, for the kid's sake, that she finds him. Reaching out to her affair partner in my last update turned out to be a huge step. It played a major role in uncovering the full truth and finally closing that painful chapter of my life. But enough about that. That story is done. Now, let's dive into something new. I'm 34 years old, and I've been married to my wife, Sarah, for 5 years. It feels like just yesterday when she first moved into our neighborhood. I still remember the day she showed up at my doorstep, holding a plate of homemade cookies. She had baked them as a way to introduce herself to the neighbors, which, honestly, isn't something you see every day. Sarah was always full of energy, the kind of person who could strike up a conversation with anyone. She had this warm, friendly vibe that made people feel comfortable right away. That day, when she handed me the cookies, I invited her in for a cup of coffee. And just like that, over coffee and cookies, we became friends. We dated for 2 years before finally tying the knot. One thing Sarah loved just as much as she loved me was her garden. She was obsessed with plants. With her background in botany, she even owned a small nursery. But her personal garden? That was her baby. She cared for every flower like it was part of her family. And I'm not exaggerating. Every morning, as she watered her plants, she would actually talk to them. Before we got married, she made one thing very clear. I would have to move in with her because she refused to leave her garden. She didn't ask, she just told me. I didn't mind, though. I understood how much it meant to her, so I moved in without a second thought. For a long time, everything was great. Our marriage was smooth, easy, and happy. But lately, things have changed. The same differences that once brought us together are now starting to push us apart. Sarah and I are total opposites when it comes to socializing. She's outgoing, always making new friends, constantly surrounding herself with people. Meanwhile, I'm the exact opposite. I'm an introvert. I'm quiet. I don't just start conversations with strangers, and I only have a handful of close friends. For me, the perfect way to spend a day off is just staying home, relaxing, cooking a meal, and watching TV with Sarah. But for her, she needs to go out, whether it's meeting up with friends, grabbing coffee, or finding a new place to eat. Early in our marriage, we knew this difference could cause problems, so we made a deal. Saturdays were her days. We'd go out, do something social, whatever she wanted. Sundays, though, were my days, reserved for just the two of us, staying home and spending quality time together. For a while, this setup worked perfectly. For a long time, our arrangement worked just fine. But lately, things have started to shift in a way I didn't expect. Over the past few weeks, Sarah has been spending a lot more time outside the house. She's constantly out, meeting up with friends, attending social events, always on the go. It feels like she's barely home anymore. To be fair, it's not like she's deliberately ignoring me or trying to push me away. Every time she goes out, she invites me along. But most of the time, I turn her down. By the time I get home from work, I'm done, socially drained, with zero energy left to mingle or make small talk. I've tagged along a couple of times just to make her happy, but honestly, I didn't enjoy myself. The conversations felt forced, and by the end of the night, I was exhausted. So, the next time she asked me to come along, I decided to just stay home. The thing is, I miss her. She's been going out more than ever, and when she finally gets back, she's usually too tired to do anything but go straight to bed. I miss the deep conversations we used to have, the connection we shared. I don't want to be the kind of husband who holds his wife back from doing the things she loves. I want her to have fun, go out, and enjoy herself. But lately, it feels like she just doesn't care about spending as much time with me, and that's been eating away at me. Has she gotten bored of our relationship? Or is this just a phase? I know there aren't any obvious red flags, but after reading so many stories about infidelity online, I can't help but be a little more cautious. I don't want to ignore something that could be a sign of trouble. Hopefully, this is just a temporary thing, and things will go back to normal soon. Update. After reading through the responses to my last post, I realized something. I needed to stop sulking in silence and actually talk to Sarah. So that's exactly what I decided to do. Being an introvert in a relationship with an extrovert isn't always easy. Sometimes we overthink things. We worry that our partner might eventually get bored of us because we're not as outgoing as they are. And that's exactly what I was doing. Overthinking. Before bringing it up with her, I spent way too much time running different conversations through my head, trying to figure out the best way to express my feelings without upsetting her. But all that mental stress was unnecessary. The best thing I could do was just be honest. So, one evening, when Sarah got home from her nursery, I told her we needed to talk. When I told Rachel that we needed to talk, she seemed a little caught off guard. She wasn't expecting me to ask for a serious conversation out of nowhere. But I didn't hold back. I laid everything out, the way I'd been feeling, the things that had been bothering me. She listened. And when I was done, she didn't get defensive or brush off my feelings. Instead, she apologized. She told me that she hadn't realized how much her constant outings were affecting me, and she promised to be more mindful moving forward. Rachel explained that she had just been spending more time out because a lot of her friends had recently come back into town after a long time away. But she assured me she was happy to go back to the routine we both loved. Hearing that was a relief. She got it. She respected my feelings. And instead of arguing, we had a real, open conversation like two adults who truly loved each other. For a while, things actually did get better. We found our balance again, and I started feeling hopeful that everything would be okay. But the peace didn't last long. Barely 2 weeks later, Rachel slipped right back into her old habits. She started coming home late from the nursery, hanging out with friends even more than before, and once again, I was spending most of my time alone at home. But what really worried me? She had started neglecting her garden. That's when I knew something was off. For as long as I had known her, Rachel had cared more about her plants than anything else, sometimes even more than me. Her garden was everything to her. So, when I saw her ignoring it, I knew something was wrong. One afternoon, I got bored and decided to water the plants myself since she hadn't been around to do it. That's when I noticed something shocking. One of the plants had died. It hit me hard because I knew how much these plants meant to her. There was no way she would ever be this careless with them. That night, when she came home, I showed her the dead plant. She had no clue. She hadn't even noticed. She was so startled, she didn't even finish her dinner, just got up and rushed straight outside to check on the rest of her garden. I followed behind her, watching. She didn't cry, but I could see it in her face. She was genuinely upset. Rachel kept blaming herself, saying she had gotten so caught up in her social life and busy schedule that she had completely neglected her plants. She promised, right then and there, that she would start taking better care of them again. I just stood there, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this meant she would start acting like her old self again. And, in a way, she did. She threw herself back into taking care of her plants, giving them the same love and attention she always had. But oddly enough, she didn't cut back on her time away from home. Rachel had fallen into a new routine. She'd wake up early to take care of her plants, then spend the evenings out with her friends. Spending time with me? That barely seemed to cross her mind anymore. Her two biggest priorities were socializing and taking care of her beloved plants, the ones she lovingly called her babies. I know it probably sounds ridiculous. Even to me, it feels weird to admit, but I started feeling jealous. Not just of her friends, but of her garden. We had already talked about this before, and she had promised to balance her time better. But here we were again, right back to where we started. I didn't want another confrontation. Bringing it up again would just make me feel pathetic. I wanted to fix this, but I didn't want to keep repeating myself. So, instead of talking to her about it, I made a different choice. I pulled back. 2 nights ago. That evening, when I got home from work, Rachel was already there. She greeted me with a quick kiss, told me she had dinner ready for me, and then casually mentioned that she was heading out to meet a friend. I was furious, but I didn't say a word. The moment she walked out the door, I left too. I didn't even touch the food she had made. Instead, I called up an old friend I hadn't seen in ages. We spent hours catching up, something I hadn't done in a long time. He left around 9 p.m., but I still wasn't ready to go home. So, I went to a bar. Now, I'm not a big drinker, but that night, I got drunk. And when it was time to go home, I didn't. I booked a hotel room instead. At some point, my phone started ringing. It was Rachel. I let it go to voicemail. Almost immediately, she sent me a text, asking where I was. I didn't answer. For once, I wanted her to feel what it was like to be left in the dark, to experience even a fraction of the loneliness I had been feeling every single day. Lying on the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, I wondered if I was being stupid. But honestly, I didn't care. I shut my eyes and fell asleep almost instantly. The next morning, I woke up late, hungover, groggy, and still frustrated. When I finally turned my phone back on, I was met with a flood of texts from Rachel. Apparently, she had been worried sick. I decided to head home. The moment I stepped inside, Rachel was getting ready to leave for work. But the second she saw me, she lost it. "Where the hell have you been?" she demanded. She was angry, really angry. But, strangely enough, that gave me a small sense of satisfaction. I didn't lie. I told her the truth. I told her I didn't want to come home to her. Because, at this point, she was barely ever there. I told Rachel the truth, how I felt alone in this marriage and how that was the reason I had started spending more time outside the house. But instead of listening, she snapped. She accused me of acting like a child, saying I was just trying to get attention. Her defensive attitude only made me angrier. Instead of owning up to her mistakes, she flipped the script and blamed me. That was it. We exploded into a full-blown argument, throwing hurtful words back and forth. Neither of us was willing to back down, and eventually she stormed off to her nursery, leaving things unresolved. I needed to vent. That's why I wrote this update, because I'm at my breaking point. I don't know what to do anymore. Part of me wants to follow her, see where she's really going. Another part of me is seriously considering hiring a private investigator. I've just had it. Update. Guys, I was right. That red flag I mentioned? It was real. And I'm so damn glad I didn't ignore it. After that huge fight, Rachel and I completely stopped talking to each other. Neither of us was willing to be the first to apologize or make amends. We were both seething. We lived under the same roof but acted like complete strangers. Our daily routines continued. I'd make breakfast, she'd handle dinner, but the silence between us was thick with tension. And this time, I refused to be the one to fix things. Not out of pride, but because it just didn't feel right. Then, about a week later, I came home from work to something unexpected. The house was dark, which was strange. Rachel always got home before me. I flipped on the lights, and that's when I saw it. A cake on the living room table. Balloons. And a big handwritten poster that said, "I'm sorry." Rachel walked over, hugged me tight, and apologized. I won't lie, it felt good. Seeing her put in the effort, hearing her acknowledge that she had been ignoring me, I actually felt hopeful. We made up that night. She even cooked my favorite meal. For the first time in a long time, we sat down, ate together, and talked. Really talked. I had been afraid that she had completely checked out of our marriage, that she just didn't care anymore. But after that night, I actually started to believe that maybe she did want to make this work. Maybe she still loved me. And for the first time in weeks, I felt happy again. But that happiness didn't last long. Because just a few days later, I discovered something that shattered me in the worst way possible. I was at work when I realized I had left behind some important documents at home. The night before, I had stayed up late working and accidentally left some important documents on my desk in the study. Since my office wasn't far from home, I decided to make a quick trip back to grab them. I expected the house to be empty. But the moment I pulled into the driveway, I froze. Rachel's car was still there. She had left for the nursery that morning. So why was she back home? As I walked toward the front door, I heard something that sent a chill straight down my spine. A man's voice. For a brief second, I considered turning around and leaving. I wasn't ready to face whatever was happening inside. But my gut told me the truth. And the truth was something I had to see for myself. I stepped into the house. And there she was. Rachel, my wife, caught in the middle of something intimate with our neighbor. I felt sick. Of all people, she was cheating with him? This guy, Adam, had moved into the neighborhood just a few months ago. Since then, I had noticed Rachel acting differently, but I had never let my mind go there. Now, standing in my own home, watching this, I could barely think straight. It was like déjà vu, almost as if I were reliving the early days of our relationship, except this time I was on the other side of it. For a moment, I stood frozen. Then, rage took over. I threw him out of my house. I wanted to do more, but my disgust for her was stronger. I wanted her gone, but it wasn't my house. It was hers. Rachel immediately started begging, swearing it was a one-time mistake. I didn't believe a word. I didn't need proof, but I wanted it. So, I pulled up our security footage. What I saw confirmed everything. This wasn't some slip-up. It had been going on for a while. I packed my bags and left without a word. She chased after me, begging, but I didn't stop. I checked into a hotel and called my lawyer. I blocked her everywhere. Even a week later, her messages still flooded my spam folder. But I refused to read a single one. Update. I was drowning in anger and heartbreak, obsessed with revenge. I wanted Rachel to feel everything she had put me through. But over time, I let it go. I moved on. I meant to update after the divorce, but I didn't want to relive it. Then, about a week ago, she found a way to contact me. And karma had wrecked her. The guy she left me for? He scammed her worse than she ever hurt me. After our divorce, Adam moved in, started working at her nursery, then began stealing from her. At first, she noticed missing plants, but he played dumb. Then, while she was busy, he got his hands on her business papers, sold the nursery, and vanished with the money. Gone. Just like that. Rachel was left with nothing. No money. No business. No future. Just regret. I read her message and sent one reply. Now you know how I felt. She threw everything away for a fling, and now her own world had crumbled. It was karma. And she hated it. She kept trying to reach out, but I refused to let her back in. A friend later told me she was in serious financial trouble. And Adam? He ran back to his wife, leaving Rachel completely alone. Moving on. The divorce crushed me, but I had no choice. I had to move forward. To keep my mind from spiraling, I poured myself into work. And it paid off. I worked harder than ever, stayed focused, and finally earned the promotion I had always wanted. Once I started putting myself first, everything changed. I cut all ties to my past, stopped looking back, and focused on me. For the first time in a long time, I finally felt in control again.